My computer takes. Okay, well, I'd just like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's WIN meeting. Before we start, can I just please request that everybody who isn't speaking actually remains muted until they're called in to speak, obviously with the exception of the speaker and myself. Also, special welcome to anybody that's not been to one of our meetings today. You're very welcome. Today's discussion is about people joining the meeting. Today's discussion, of course, is about the events in Iran. After about 5 weeks of immense protests, particularly by young people who are very bravely facing bullets and imprisonment and all sorts of manners of repression, there is no sign of it. Of the protests letting up, and now we've got the latest event, which is was at the prison, which the Iranian authorities deny has got anything to do with the protests, which I personally find hard to believe. So this afternoon we've got our Iranian comrade Aman, who is here, Aman Kafa, who is going to give us a bit of an update on what's going on and where we're up to at the moment. So Aman, how long would you like to speak for? Are you still muted, Aman? You can unmute.
Sure. I thought probably keep it to 20 minutes maximum, so let everybody talk as well.
Yeah, do you want us to give you a nudge after? Shall I give you a nudge at 15 minutes?
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Right, that's great. Right, off you go then. Thanks, Aman.
Do you want to share the screen, Aman?
Not at the moment, actually. It's okay, because I thought translating it will probably take a bit long.
Okay.
Right, so we'll have to make Aman a co-host, won't we, if he's sharing the screen at some point. Right, okay.
Well, let me say thank you first for the meeting that is taking place today. I thought I'd giving you an update probably on what is going on at the moment. As you did mention, is entering its 5th week now. The whole protest was sparked by one of the Iranian girls, a 22-year-old girl who was said to have not dressed up appropriately, and a couple of strands of her hair was showing. The morality police decided to stop her, and along the way, obviously, there was what they claimed was her previous medical history, but reality was that she was actually killed. She managed to get to they managed to get her to the hospital, but soon after she passed away, and the whole thing sparked a very, very major protest across the whole country. A protest which has got a different approach to what we have seen recently, but along the same way. The situation in Iran has been going on for, or at least the protest against the situation in Iran with the Islamic Republic has been going on for over 4 decades now. And one of the main issues that we have had along the way, and has been throughout this time, in addition to generally from the workers' side and working class movement, has been a protest with regard to the issue of women and the suppression of women as one of the major issues which has been going on, and protests have been taking place about it across the 4 decades or more. Just to give you a little bit of a background, just when the uprising took place in February 1979, on the 1st March the 8th, the first International Women's Day in Iran, there was a major demonstration, a big march in Iran, and mainly in the capital, where women came out and said, we don't accept to have any form of covering of hijab of any sort, and we don't accept any oppression, and effectively we want to have freedom. This slogan has been going on along the way, but during the past 5 weeks, this sparked a major protest across the whole country. Several issues were raised, and one of the major issues was that of the rights of women. The slogan of the whole movement soon enough became around 3 words: woman, life, and freedom. This slogan has got a lot of issues across the whole of the country. The struggle for rights of women, the struggle against oppression has been one of the pillars of protest against the Islamic Republic, but the scale of it this time continues from the protests which have been taking place over the past few years. We had, just before the COVID, we had a major protest, and then another one before the whole protest against the COVID started. And then this is the one following that. Effectively, this is a chain we've seen from the uprising time back in the late 70s right until today. The struggle for freedom and equality, to put it in a general term. The struggle has got several features. First of all, one of the main issues has been the fact that women have actually come out and they have been at the forefront. At the moment, the majority, and I mean a great majority, of the protests are taking place by the youth and women at the forefront of it. The situation has been not just against one part of the Islamic Republic, but it's against the whole establishment with regard to the rights of women. And this issue started gathering with marches and protests across different parts of the country in a variety of cities. And it grew gradually, and the first reaction of the Islamic Republic was to see if they can suppress it. And immediately we saw a crackdown of anybody who was taking part in the protest. The protesters themselves have taken a number of different approaches in order to ensure that the protest does continue and the suppression does not actually overwhelm them. This has happened by not forming a major march right in the middle of the cities and larger scale people coming down, which is a little bit of an issue with regard to the combating with the security forces, but it has been happening in different corners. And the idea has been to try to spread the security forces' ability to be able to manage the whole protests. The protests have grown, and soon enough it turned out to a situation where the slogans turned further and immediately became to not just that of the individual rights of women, but actually against the whole Islamic Republic. And we saw this with the main slogan, which is actually you hear every day or every time across every part of the society, is down with dictator, we don't want Islamic Republic, equality and freedom. And these are the major slogans that you see every day. And every time that you look at it, the idea is that the Islamic Republic and its rule has been nothing but suppression, and therefore it's not acceptable. The protests grew and became larger. It became in different parts of the cities. What we have seen is, especially in the working class areas, a larger scale of protests against the security forces. A huge amount of protests have taken place in terms of other approaches, in addition to being on the street. Walls across all of the parts of the different cities have been filled with the slogans. And at the same time, we hear that the Islamic Republic forces try to put any form of suppression that they can by arresting large numbers. And people effectively initially had tried to gather at night times. So after about local time, 8 or 9 p.m. usually, it was the case that protests were taking place, unless during the daytime. After the first 2 weeks or so, the protests started during the day as well, and gradually this has extended and extended further and further. Everywhere there is a gathering, immediately becomes a protest march, and immediately becomes against the Islamic Republic, and we have obviously the security forces. In some instances, there have been pressure on the security forces, and as a result, what has happened is that those forces have had to flee the scenes, and we have scenarios where a large number of them come over and then they try to arrest people. These arrests have actually gone in terms of use of different transport ways. It's not just the case that they come in their military vans, but in order to be able to get in, they actually have brought in ambulances, fire brigade cars, and a variety of transport means to take people and then arrest them as they can. The prisons have been mostly occupied, and the numbers of the population of prisoners have increased tremendously. There have been a number of deaths. We have had over 200, at least according to official numbers. And when I say official numbers, I mean the number of people whose name and address and age has been recorded. Among them, in the past week or so, we've had 33 underage who have been killed. The protests have actually grown. 34 4, if I'm not mistaken, but around 30-something number of youngsters who have been killed. And that has, again, increased the level of protest across the society. The main issue, which probably is important, is the whole notion of the slogans that came out at the beginning of Woman, Life and Freedom. The idea is probably one of the best analogies of this would be that what happened to Floyd and the Black Lives Matters. This was very similar in its nature at the start, and that was the right of women. The protest against any form of oppression of women, and that's not just the covering, but it was against all sections of society. If I just give you some idea of the changes across the 4 decades, a population of about 35 million in Iran has grown now to about 86 million. And if you consider half of them being women, the whole population of women at the moment in Iran is more than the total population of the country during the uprising of 79. And also there is huge amount of obviously pressure in terms of the standards of living, level of unemployment, high inflation, and all of these especially is much viewable amongst women than men, to scales of 4 or 5-fold as much. At the same time, it must be said that the number of women who are actually coming up in variety of sections, typically even if I say in terms of education, during last year, there were something about 30,000 more female students entering higher education than men. So out of about 2.5 million, more than half was women, but nonetheless, their participation in terms of ability to be able to find work is less. The other issue which has come is that of the protest against the subjugation and effectively women becoming third-class citizens. And as such, the protest has gathered momentum, not in just one part of the society, but across the whole society. And this is a spread and has repercussions, not only about the situation in Iran, but also across the whole region, and I think a much broader world. The situation is what many refer to it as, or we definitely refer to it as, a renaissance against Islamic rule. And that is something which we see immediately gathering support from protest marches in Tunisia, in Iraq, going across to Afghanistan. We saw it supported in Pakistan, and obviously going further abroad in terms of the South America and Europe. We see it as the right of women and effectively their ability to be able to be considered as equal human beings. And that in itself is not only that of the women's right, but it goes much further, and it follows the same footsteps of equality and freedom that has been a main slogan across the country for the past 4 decades. In addition to that, of this sort of nature of it, the slogan started to spread this as well. And that was that the right of women is not just for women, but it is a international demand. And that is another section which we have seen as the growing support across the country. The spread of the news and the growing momentum of this showed also not only what is happening in Iran, but internationally. Currently, there are about 8 million Iranians outside Iran. And there are a huge number of these people coming up on the streets. The biggest march was that which took place about a week ago in Canada, where 50,000 people took part. Some say even 100,000. And we are seeing that across everywhere in Europe and everywhere else. Protests are growing more and more, and the demands are becoming much more, if you like, known abroad. At the same time, what we have seen is growing protests within the country itself. The crackdown that the Islamic Republic tried to follow has not been able to work because the protests are growing further. We don't see just the protests in terms of students in universities where they have effectively taken a strike action and do not turn up for classes. And effectively all of the universities are now scenes of protest. This has spread further towards the secondary school and again further now to the primary school. what is the case is that in the universities, effectively, the students have disregarded and have stood up in terms of any separation of girls and boys, if you like, male and female. And in many places, they have actually gone together and started making in practice, the ability of the Islamic to segregate women a practical impossibility. This has gone to the secondary schools where girls are typically taking off their scarves, and even the attempts by the Ministry of Education and some of the hierarchy in terms of education to try to go to schools and try to talk to them, effectively that has been ended up in bullying the people who were speaking from the government, and automatically that has spread further and further as well. Now we see girls and women walking in the street and taking off their scarves, walking right in front of the security forces, and this is showing immense amount of bravery. One thing which is very, very visible across the whole country is that extent of bravery of these people that are showing on the streets in front of the very much armed and working security forces.
That's 15 minutes, Emma.
Sure, thanks. And they're trying to actually put further and further pressure on the Islamic Republic. Any actions that they have done so far has backfired. Yesterday, the head of the security forces came out and said the battleground has now moved. It's no longer what we used to see just in one part, but we are actually having schools as our battleground. So you can see the extent of the development of the protests. Furthermore, what has happened is the mass support for this. Effectively, all of the streets in most places have become filled up with cars, and one way of people producing their support is continuous blaring of their horns as they go in the cars, and that has produced immense amount of difficulty for the security forces being able to even get to some of the scenes. And anybody who is being attacked or arrested or being attempted to be arrested, automatically see a large crowd gathering around it and trying to stop them. It's not something that anybody calls for demonstrations or marches. What happens is, as you see people, they're saying everywhere you go, you see this. There are protests everywhere. Metro stations, underground stations, as soon as the underground slows down, the crowd gathers and it starts the slogan and protest against the Islamic Republic. And this is growing and growing further. At the same time, we have had situation in different workplaces, and I'm talking in variety of workplaces. In some parts, we've had strike actions coming up in support, namely that of the petrochemical workers in the cities of Asalawiya and also in Abadan in south of Iran. And this is also another aspect that immediately felt a huge amount of crackdown by the Islamic Republic. The attempts that the Islamic Republic had initially was to try to isolate the protest, making it sound as if it is one part or one nationality in one corner against another. And that typically against the south in Balochistan, which is near Pakistan, or that of the Kurdistan up north. Both of these have actually proven to be ineffective, and the slogans on the streets are, it doesn't matter from south to north, we are one people, we are fighting against the same state. The Islamic Republic has tried this further for the past few days, at least almost over a week. They have been bombarding some of the centers in Iraq on west as positions of some of the Kurdish nationalist forces, and that is being continued, and they reinforced that today, and they said that we will continue this over and over again. But protests across Iraq also have picked up the same slogans as that is in Iran, and the support is growing from that end. The main issue that probably needs to be mentioned here, if I just mention that briefly, is that what we see is further and further polarization in the society. The right wing, who wants to have an approach from above, being able to transfer power from above, people become effectively their army in the street who at the end are supposed to listen to the generals. That side of the right wing has the intention of trying to bring in effectively some sort of a support from the states. And you see that across different gatherings as well in abroad, very much more in terms of asking different states, why don't you support us? Why don't you close down the Iranian embassies? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And the main demand is expressed against at the hands of the states. Whereas insofar as the other side in Iran is concerned, and that again you see it abroad, is the same thing. The question of the importance of the working class in this case would actually bring the same issue in terms of what is abroad outside Iran, and that is going to the working class and working class organizations. Variety of international trade unions in Norway and in Sweden, in Germany, and even across the trans-international ones have expressed their support. We've had yesterday the support of the oil workers in Iraq as well for the protests that are taking place in Iran. That is the other aspect which is actually going forward. The situation now has reached a part where there are questions being asked, and these are the questions that everybody is actually going for and thinking about at the moment. And that is what we are pressing in terms of how do we ensure at every stage we effectively establish any victory in this, and considering this as a battle rather than the complete war. How can we make sure we establish it? And in every part, our position is that of the building of the councils in working places, in places where people live, and also ensuring that we actually safeguard ourselves. These are the parts. Other parts of the extreme right, if you want to think of it in that way, have also, to a large extent, shown that they have evaporated. Mujahideen, for example, whose leader is still wearing a hijab, is effectively evaporated. What we have is the right wing and the left, and the polarization, and the battle between these two is what is actually going on in Iran. The question is, to what extent would which one win? In reality, the Islamic Republic is put at the corner. They still have the ability to bring in their thugs and go on a huge rampage of killing. But so far as the people are concerned in terms of the opposition left and right, neither of them have got the upper hand at the moment. That's the reality. But what we are seeing is a further and further polarization and further disregard for what the right wing is putting forward. And that in itself is developing. So we see it to a large extent as another stage, another advancement in the protest against the Islamic Republic and the movement towards what we want effectively as a workers' rule. So this is the current situation in terms of the format of it. We have had huge amount of victory. The Islamic Republic all say, whether it is part of the government, positional or opposition, they all are saying the situation in Iran of today cannot be reversed. What happened in September 2022, the world, so far as Iran is concerned, is completely different now. That is impossible to continue. There is no way the Islamic Republic can do the same as it done before. Slogans on the street that this is a ruling party, that it is killing kids, and killing our youth, that is reverberating everywhere. And this is further and further growing. The last night event of the fire in the notorious Evin prison. Evin prison is the prison that was built during the Shah's time and has continued to be used as a main center, a main prison by the Islamic Republic. There was a fire in it last night. The fire went on for about 2.5 hours. The Islamic Republic main authorities have given contradictory comments as why it happened, how it happened, or what was the situation. And then immediately as soon as that happened, since last night, 8 o'clock Tehran's time, which was in the darkness, soon as the fire broke out and a few explosion sounds came out, people started moving in large numbers towards the prison to see what is happening. Currently, there are a lot of people who have been arrested recently in that place. And then immediately the relationship with outside was that the marches and protests against the centers of Islamic Republic started at about 11 o'clock last night. And that is across Germany, France, UK, everywhere else. People were on the street and protesting against the Islamic Republic in support of what is happening in Iran. The mood is one of condolences and not knowing exactly what has happened, because these are effectively people who are held in the prison and the fire has broken out. The exact reasoning of it has not been completely verified yet. Some say that, or some authorities have said that there was a fighting between the prisoners. Some say there was some fighting between the prisoners and some of the guards. But in any case, today they announced at least 5 people have died in the prisons. A number of them have been moved to other prisons. Some tens have been said to have been breathing fumes and they have been transferred to hospitals. But again, as I said, the exact numbers and everything else is completely hidden, and it is impossible to actually get further news, but everybody's pressing to see what is happening. Right now, there are protests taking place in front of the Evin prison, where parents and relatives are actually gathering to want to see what has happened to their loved ones. And these loved ones are going from very, very young age, teens, right down to people who have been held for political reasons and a variety of other things.
And in about 25 minutes now. I don't want to stop because obviously it's so interesting, just to let you know. Yeah.
Sure. No. So that is going on. Protests are taking place. What we are trying to do, as I said, the main important part is establishing all the gains. And the only way that we can establish it is by taking control and ensuring that at the end of the day, the Islamic Republic forces would not be able to enter different parts of the cities and be able to stand against them. And this is the scenario as we see it developing. It's new, it's different, and I'm sure you all agree. There is no 2 revolutions in the world which have been the same. Everything's changed and everything's different. The internet goes down, they find other ways. The Islamic Republic doesn't have a choice. That is clear. But here, the question, as I said, is the question of the polarization and further advancement towards gaining control and being able to establish equality and freedom and effectively the councils where people could actually rule over themselves and get rid of the state as it is. And this is the scenario, and it's an ongoing issue. Some want to have it ended right now. This is what partly right wing wants to do. And at the same time, we have protesters who are trying to see if they can establish a situation and improve their own position so that they can actually take effective control. And that's the other thing which is taking place at the time. So we are in the middle of it. It could go either direction. It could take longer. It could, revolutions happen without us wanting to, or sometimes happen with even us fighting for it. But it is something which is not known at the moment, but definitely the society has advanced hugely, and the situation of the protest against the Islamic Republic for equality and freedom has advanced tremendously. And this is where we are. I hope I've given you a sort of brief run through of what's going on.
That's absolutely fantastic, Amal. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of things you said now. I certainly have been watching it, following it in the mainstream media and some of the other channels, and I didn't know quite a few of those things, really. So thanks very much for that. That was a really, really good account. Very, very inspiring, I think. So can I ask now if comrades want to come in, please try and use your electronic hand if you wish to speak. And if everybody could try and keep the comments to 5 minutes, this allows as many people to come in as possible. And do ask a man questions, and then we'll see how it goes, whether we stop and let him answer or we ask him to sum it up at the end. So let's see what happens. So who would like to speak? Ian.
I'd just like to ask a question. First of all, I'm afraid I missed some of the start of the talk because I was on another webinar that overran. So you may have already mentioned it to an extent, but I just wanted to ask mainly about the international aspects, because obviously Iran's a country that's been under sanctions, which have impacted the economy. And so there's a lot of economic head of steam built up behind that, at the same time as I'd imagine a nationalistic rallying around the flag, because the sanctions themselves are clearly very unfair from the United States after Iran went into a deal that it kept, and Trump changed his mind and decided he didn't like it, and Biden ran as the candidate who'd put an X wherever Trump put a tick sign or whatever, but then didn't, as with so many other things, didn't change the Trump approach on this, or hasn't yet. So there's that aspect. There's the aspect of political competition, geopolitics in the region, where in general Iran seems to be on the more anti-sectarian side compared to Saudi Arabia. When it comes to Yemen, would probably be the best current example. Saudi Arabia bombing it back into the Stone Age, and Iran supporting the government that had come to power, a very imperfect government, of course, that had come to power in a revolt against the previous corrupt leader that Saudi still, in a kind of Juan Guaido approach, recognizes as legitimate president. And they ask him, do you want me to bomb your country? Yes, I do. And they've destroyed Yemen in that way with Western support. Again, Biden said he'd changed the policy, even said he was changing it, but hasn't really. So there's all these different things swirling around, and at the same time, this can't excuse the regime either for the capitalist corruption that's been going on for decades, the destruction of the left, the real carnival of reaction in the 80s, or the specific cause of these particular protests, beating a young woman to death simply for wearing her hijab wrongly, not even not wearing it. So of course there's a lot of hypocrisy from the West supporting the Saudis who have an even worse hijab policy, but nothing can excuse the regime for legitimate grievances of this protest. But at the same time, the forces piling in behind it, and I did hear you talking about the right wing and far right forces, mention the Mujahideen, but also I was on the Assange protest down in London last week, and we after surrounding Parliament with the human chain, we went up to Parliament Square, but then we sort of well, we were dispersing anyway, and eventually I decided I had to get out because otherwise I'd look like an Iranian monarchist. There was a Mahsa Amini protest, which I approve of, the actual demands, but all the flags on it that I could see were either the lion flag of the Shah or even posters of the Shah's son, the current, you know, well, he looked like the young pretender in the posters. I presume he's actually the old pretender since his dad died 40 years ago. So these forces that, given the Islamic Republic came to power in this mass uprising against the Shah, that a mass uprising against it could realistically lead to the return of the Shah. But it would certainly be a period of danger for Iran with the way the Americans have it in its crosshairs, and the Saudis and so on. And so how can we navigate those complications while also supporting a revolution against misogyny, brutality and corruption?
Okay, thanks, Ian. There's some more hands up, so we'll take some more contributions. David Hempson, please.
Comrades, when there are 11-year-old girls going into the streets and calling for the death of the dictator, this is an extraordinary revolution, which has got right through to the depths of the youth, something like the youth of the French Revolution, which I've seen pictured, of young boys there, and they are literally boys. They're about 12 years old, and they were the cutting edge of the democratic revolution in France. And now we find 11-year-old girls being driven to the extent of calling for the death of the dictator, not the removal, the killing, a revolution which is going to behead the head of the regime. This is extraordinary. And it does invite comparison in my head with the youth of 1976 who were a little bit older in South Africa, who ran unarmed against the police and used dustbin lids and so forth to protect themselves, even when the bullets were flying. An extraordinary revolution, which has gone through the depths of society and in which women are playing such an important role, possibly not the, and I'll come back to this, possibly not the decisive role in the end. But I just want to mention and draw the links that throughout the world at the moment, every right-wing regime is mobilizing against women's rights. In America, this is a daily occurrence where there's been every attempt to try and remove women from positions of authority, but mainly in terms of the removal of rights of women to control their own bodies. And that is a rallying slogan of the Christians. In other words, the same as the Islamicists. It's a right-wing, religious, bigoted movement, but it's extensively popular in the sense that the right-wing are making advances in this way. And I do think, and I want to return to this a bit later, that the left, of all kinds of strange phenomena on the left, with the Stalinists particularly, are not supporting this revolution in any way at all, and are actually giving support tacitly or even openly to the killing, or the brutal killing and the brutalization of young women and women in general, and then laughing this off as a matter of, well, it's anti-imperialist. The killing of women is anti-imperialist. And this is where the crazy extent to which the left is driven. I just want to touch on generational issues. And I want to say this, that what we're seeing here is an international social revolution. That's the point. I've made the point against the right, but let's make the point positively in our field. These are the young revolutionaries which are coming towards us, and we must welcome them with open arms. We are of an older generation if you look across the spectrum, and here we have young minds, young women who are dedicating themselves to revolution, and we must seek every possible way of giving them support and building on this generation. The generation of 1976 in South Africa, unfortunately, the leaders were entirely corrupted. They ended up either in exile and almost in semi-suicidal movements. All of them died. Now it's hardly anyone, which have survived, except those who have survived long enough to become managing directors of big corporations in South Africa. In other words, the fire of revolution was doused and ended up somewhere else. They're nowhere to be found in the trade union movement or anywhere else. Now we have to blow on the embers and on the flames that we see here, attract them into our ranks and build. So it's an international social revolution, and every oppressed member of society has, through the workers' revolution, is going to have an expression of all the values that they want. Quirky and even odd at times, those are our children, we claim them, and we will work together with them and educate them and build them up. I want to pay a tribute to the movement in this sense. Just imagine this. This was a Kurdish young girl, in other words, from a minority of society, and yet the majority is now siding with her. Amazing. This is amazing. This is the democratic revolution in progress, but it will not be realized in its full extent. It will not be realized at all unless it moves over to a workers' revolution in which the real large battalions that have been mentioned, the oil workers and other workers, are moving over into the revolution and actually bringing all the strength, to bear. And so we're seeing this. I just want to not go on, but just come.
You've had 5 minutes, David, actually.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me just mention this point. We've got to think through the perspectives. In the past, the revolution has been suppressed in Iran through just gunfire. In other words, just eventually, if you kill enough people, eventually people don't come out any further. That's how the Arab Revolution, that was how the revolution throughout North Africa and elsewhere was suppressed. Now we're going to have to see the breaking up of the ruling elements and the defeats at a number of levels to be able to see this revolution to success. Anyway, all strength to our comrades.
Thanks very much, David. I thought you were going to say, because some of these young women are giving up their lives for this, which is kind of heartbreaking to watch, but it's just incredible testament to their courage and determination. Right, it's Johnny or Dominic next.
Yeah, it's Dominic. It's just a couple of questions. I just wanted to ask a man, how big is the working class involvement in the, we've got the oil strikes and what other workers might be on strike, and how strong are the unions in Iran? And the other one I wanted to ask is that I'd imagine there's a great deal of political discussion going on among the protesters and among the people. And I'm just wondering, is the working class organised in any of these discussions? Do you imagine that there'll be, in the communities and so on? I know you're talking about building community groups, but getting out and speaking with people and putting forward a socialist position. And I just wanted to comment on David's thing. I mean, as far as I'm concerned with the CP, they're basically just Russian nationalists, and they don't give a damn what sort of regime they've got in Russia, whether it's, what they call it, social democrat, right-wing dictatorship or anything else. So, and you've got to start asking them how they support the people who support Russia, Le Pen and the likes of them. Anyway, I'll finish on that.
Thanks, Dominic. We're just going to take the next three speakers and we'll perhaps just return to a man for a minute, see if he wants to answer any of the questions that have been asked, because of course they will contribute to the further discussion. So, Matthew, would you like to go next?
Providing this video is supposed to work. Yeah, okay. Also on the question of the working class. I mean, I think from what I've seen, obviously there's been a real effort by the regime to crush down the conditions of workers, and the whole question of basically making virtually all employment insecure, moving towards contract workers. Obviously the problems of organising and the struggles to organise, things like the outbreak of the bus drivers strike a few years ago. The whole question is, as you said, in terms of the core working class in the oil sector, the difference between the contract, those workers on contract with insecure employment, and those workers with more secure forms of employment, more central, obviously, in terms of a highly technical industry like oil industry. How does that work in terms of, as a comrade previously said, the organisation of the working class, and then obviously, the sort of political consciousness, in terms of orientating towards this new upsurge. Because obviously we're going to see a whole series of different forces that are going to see opportunity here, both left and right. The other thing I think also is the impact on all the surrounding countries, where obviously Iran, the Iranian regime has played a major role in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere. And the question is really, okay, what is the impact of the weakness and the instability of that regime in terms of the politics of these countries, and obviously the whole question, the unresolved questions, which are now piling up on each other in terms of, we've seen obviously the Arab Spring of 2011 and the crushing of that by various means, mostly by force. We've seen, as a comrade, as I agree with the man's thing, who's saying, well, this is like the re-eruption of 1979. All of those issues are unresolved and have now burst out again. It raises the whole question of, again, not merely of Iran, but the whole of the Middle East. So I'm interested to know what comments on that. Thanks.
Matthew, Temos.
Yes. First of all, we have to recognize the enormous importance of what's happening. One of the dangers for every one of us, for every revolutionary, is not to recognize a revolution when it happens. And we nearly always see people who see a revolution, the start of a revolution, and they think, oh, well, this is something that is not quite a revolution, it's a protest, it's this and that. And in this case, when you see something of this extent, both in space and in time, it's nothing but the beginning of a revolution. And we have to start from that. As Aman said, every revolution is different, but there are standard things that we have to see happening. It happened in the Russian Revolution. It happened in the recent revolutions in Europe. It happened in the Arab Spring, and that is that none of these revolutions started from an organized group. It starts spontaneously and spreads rapidly across society. And that means that these people who are carrying out these protests, rather the beginnings of revolution, they don't have a joint political program. They have a will to get rid of the suppression that's happening, but not much more than that. And as we saw in the Arab Spring, which is a good example to see, I don't think that the Arab Spring was crushed by force. It succeeded. In most countries, it got rid of the dictators. And it's only later that the West managed to undercut, to undermine these revolutions, and first through democratic slogans, then through help, both theoretical, financial, and military. They managed to turn the revolution back, and in some cases turn it into a counter-revolution. And this, what we see today in Iran, I think, is something that we should be very careful how we go about. What's happening I think the regime, it could very well be toppled in the next period. But where all this movement ends up, it's not clear. The West, it hasn't yet started to support these protests, didn't start supporting seriously the revolutionary movement because they're afraid of it. But sooner or later, they start attempting to hijack it and bring it to their usual slogans. Democracy, get rid of this, probably bring some royalist sentiments, probably even get rid of the royalist part and go for Western democracy and the liberalism. They will have a hard time in doing that. When they have a revolution in front of them, it's very difficult to control. As it is very important to see whether there are enough conscious revolutionaries spread throughout the country that they could join forces in something that could crystallize in some sort of political program that will take Iran forward. In any other country, I would be very pessimistic. Other country, I mean in the periphery of capitalism. Iran is probably the only country that is different. It's more like the Arab Spring thing, and it could vary. It has revolutionary traditions. It has revolutionaries that know what they are up against. That they know what imperialism is, and it's very likely that the revolution could organize itself, and we could see some real hope for the world revolution there. I'm not saying that this is certain. It's probably not even the most likely development. I don't know, but there is a possibility there, and I think I don't know much about Iran to go into more specific thing, but specific predictions. But I think that we should really start looking and helping in any way we can to manage to turn this revolution into something, into a real social revolution, and not only a democratic one. Because as it was said before, if we leave it just on a democratic basis, democracy will not last long. It's not enough. We have to have a more daring revolutionary perspective. As Napoleon.
5 minutes, Temo.
Yes, I'm finishing now. Revolutions can neither be started nor ended. We can only the only possibility is for someone to give it a direction through victories, and this is such a situation in Iran.
Okay, thanks very much, Temos. Leslie.
Thanks, Eman. Absolutely amazing and inspiring seeing the courage of such extremely young women, very young teenagers, as people have said. And obviously, you have got, agree with the points that have been made. You've got a spontaneous uprising, especially of young women, but youth being drawn into that. And also, it seems an element of maybe avoiding organisation leadership to avoid targeting people for arrest, but it is like the start of many a revolution, just people coming out on the street. But the practical issues are about how to forge links with, with the oil workers, etc. So have workers come out on the street directly in support of the sort of spontaneous demonstrations? Is there any element amongst the students to forge any kind of links? And also, I think we have to think about how we can develop international support in many practical ways. From what Temos was saying, about the idea that we need to be raising solidarity, but also socialist ideas over here, and obviously it's quite worrying that if posters of the Shah and the Shah's family, etc., have been waved, it's cutting across that with the ideas of what's needed for a social revolution. So how we can help to make that more concrete.
Thanks, Leslie. Roger's just asked if you can ask a couple of quick questions before I ask a man to respond to what's been said so far. Roger.
Yes, well, first of all, thanks to Aman for a really brilliant and you're giving us a real brilliant insight into the events that are taking place. First question, I'm been shocked to find on WhatsApp groups that are on one WhatsApp group that I'm on to socialist discussion, that people are still coming up with this line that this is all a CIA plot. So apparently, what the women of Iran ought to do is to continue to wear their hijab out of considerations of international protocol and diplomacy, so as not to give the CIA and and NATO a victory in this struggle. Now, obviously, I know how to answer that, but I would like Ahmad, if he could comment on that, that would be helpful. I did invite the comrades who were putting this ludicrous position forward to come today, and apparently they were too busy. So at least maybe you could give me a quote that I could throw back at them. The other question is that I know that Oman has quite serious contacts in the working class in Iran. I don't know how much you can tell us, but if you can tell us something about the position that your comrades have been putting forward, and even perhaps the part that they played in these events.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Let's just go back to a man now, just to sum it up. If I could just stick one more question in there, I've been rather interested in how you think this compares with the recent events in Sri Lanka, which was another massive uprising by the youth, which unfortunately seems to have fallen back. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. So do you want to come back in, man, and try and answer that pile of questions?
Sure. Pam, I'm sorry, do you think it would be possible for me to get to show you some short videos, a few seconds each?
Yeah. We've got to make you a co-host. I think Roger's going to organise that. Just hold on.
Sometimes it's easier to show you through pictures rather than actually explaining it.
Yeah. You've done that right. You should be able to share your screen now, man.
Okay, let me just see. Perfect. Let's see if it works. Should I share with all participants? Probably that's easiest.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Not so far.
Okay, let's try again. I put on share all participants, and that should actually work, presumably.
Then go to another screen that shows you what you've got open. You need to click on the one.
Okay, sure. Can you see this now? You should be able to see the whole screen, presumably.
I think now.
Screen? No?
The participants at the moment.
Okay, so let me share them one by one. Probably that's easier. Can you see this?
Ah, right. Yes, we can now.
Okay. Now, I try to show them one at a time. Probably that's the easiest way. This is the part of we were mentioning about the workers or oil workers in the south. This is one example. This is the shouting against calling shameful security forces and the Islamic government. This is the oil workers on a strike. This is 6 o'clock in the morning for the strike that they have come out, and they actually are calling for an end of the government's rule. And if I could go back, I'm trying to share them all at a time together. Sorry, I'm not very good at sharing on Zoom. Let me see if I can share another. Okay, let me just share the next one. Actually, if I try and share the whole screen, maybe that's easier. Can you see my whole screen?
Oh.
Can you see it now?
Ah, yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just show you the extent. This is in the city of Sanandaj. I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see the whole thing. This is the protest where you see the protesters here, and these are the security forces. The group comes, and they only got stones in there. And this is the running away of the security forces. The extent in terms of different parts of the city. Let me try and show you this one. This is again workers in the south. These are the workers who are actually calling for support for the workers struggles. This is another one. I thought some of these would show you some pictures. This is in the city of Tabriz. This is another one, just to show you the extent when we say the kids and everybody is on the streets. They say, what they're saying is mortars, tanks, or bullets don't make any difference. Mullahs must get lost. This is another one in a school, which is interesting. This is one of the main ministries of education come to school to advise kids that they must mind their head covering. And you can see all the girls have gone in without their head covering in front of the guy. And they throw him out of the school. Okay, I just tried to give you a picture of different parts as what is happening. And I think it's a good idea to see that the extent goes from large numbers, universities, etc. I mentioned some of the slogans, and I tried to say what the polarization is. And I think this is important. It's literally a polarization which is taking place, and it's deepening and deepening. On one hand, you have the right wing, and right wing has got one issue, and the issue that they have is transfer of power from the top, literally. So therefore, the states become their main issue in terms of the fact that they would be able to get support from the states. So you would see them gathering in front of number 10, you see them gathering in front of the White House, you see them in front of the EU Parliament, and they're asking the states to provide support. This is one hand, and that's the main strategy, transfer of power from the top. And then we have the bottom below, where the protests in Iran and those that you see on the other side who are actually calling for something completely different. They're saying, we do not want anybody to come from outside to represent us. We are here. And we are here, so we have our own representation. Now, the idea of producing councils as councils like Soviets. In Farsi, Soviets councils in Farsi means Shura. And this is the call for Shura. That means Soviets, if that's an easier way to understand the term in terms of council and Soviets, formed in different parts where people are actually, representatives are elected and they can be brought down at any time. And obviously, every time they have to have the continuous meetings. And these are the Soviets which actually form up and formed right to the very top. The issue of Soviets is longer standing in Iran, and it is one way of actually seeing that the Islamic Republic has not been able even to combat it. Even the monarchists, they say they have got a transitional council that will come through to do the work. So effectively what we see is these two parts are actually struggling. The media, which is effectively that of the right wing, they only portray one part of the slogan. So it'll give you some examples of the other slogans which are taking place in Iran. And these are, again, very widespread. One of them is, we don't want an oppressor, whether it is a mullah or a shah. This is widespread. This is written in many of the walls across the city. We have the other part where while they are actually going and asking for the West to provide help or the different states to provide help, the other slogan, which is widespread again in Iran is that so far, what have we seen them do other than support the Islamic Republic? So therefore, we rely only on our forces. And this is again widespread. So we see this both ends. What you see abroad in different parts, part of the gatherings which take place, the Mujahideen were the initial inventors of this tactic. And that was every time there was a group of people, they used to come with a lot of banners in front of it. And you thought, this is the protest for those. But when you actually listen to the slogans, what they were saying, it was different. I remember even Mujahideen coming to the miners' strike protest, and they had a big banner of Mujahideen at the front of it. And they used to say as if they are, other people are coming in their protest. This is exactly the same tactic that the right wing has picked up. Every time there is a protest, they come with large number of banners, go across the whole place. A few of them try to lift a few pictures up, and they say, this is our site. We do see the right does exist. It's impossible to say the right does not exist. They do have a force. Are they stronger than the left? The answer is no. The issue is that at the moment, the Islamic Republic does know it is call for an end. And this is set across the whole place. Everybody knows it. The question is, which alternative would actually pick up the upper hand? This is not decided yet. The right wing does not have enough power to take over, nor does the left to overcome them. This is a battle. This is literally what is going on. Polarization means the battle between the alternatives. Literally, that is developing inside the country at the moment. Is the situation one that people are thinking about any fight against the Islamic Republic would be playing in the hands of the CIA? I think this is absolutely false. To start with, the West, especially US, was using Mujahideen as the alternative. The current movement over the past month has literally evaporated that alternative. The West, at the moment, all the Western states are supporting the Islamic Republic. That is the scenario. To think about it is, if you think they're fools, I think we would be undermining ourselves. Literally, think about it from the point of view of an imperialist country, or if you like, a bourgeois sitting internationally. Why would they change the Islamic Republic to something that could possibly produce something which is more left-wing? Now, during the 1979 uprising, throughout that time, the whole idea was they brought Khomeini into power, literally. They made the deal from the top. Shah was removed, Khomeini was instigated. Now, that time, the whole idea was that they could use a force like Khomeini to overcome the revolutionary movement that was taking place. Shah was not able to suppress it, so they had to change it. So therefore, the Islamic Republic is a continuation of what Shah was. The situation now is, again, if you think about it from a strategic point of view of, let's say, US, or Britain for that matter, or France, or anybody else, or China, or Russia, whichever one you want to think about, all of them, at the moment, the situation is volatile. It could tip to the left. Why would they, what force do they have which is more established than the Islamic Republic? Just to give you an example, 2 weeks ago, it was an idea that an exchange has taken place with freedom of some of the dual citizens in Iran. And some of them were from dual citizens from US and Canada. They were released. The day after, Biden and administration came out and they said, there has been no deal with the Islamic Republic. But what we saw is less than 24 hours, $7 billion of Iranian money was released from South Korea. Now, everybody knows that the West, or if you like, capitalism internationally, does not have a better alternative than the Islamic Republic. So they're not against the Islamic Republic. So the notion that anybody who's fighting against the Islamic Republic is acting in the interest of the imperialists is false from the bottom. It just doesn't make sense. Why would they want to change it? They want to have an oppressive regime in Iran. Islamic Republic exists. There is no better right-wing alternative that could not endanger the whole capitalism in Iran. That's one thing. Another issue is the situation of Iran itself. I mentioned there are 86 million. That 86 million, they have developed. Iran is the only country in the region which has had several revolutions before. The number of books that are translated, the number of books that are published in Iran are the highest by several fold across the whole Middle East. You have highly graduated number of youth, a large number. Society is highly politicized. So in this society, nobody needs to talk. Iran probably is the only country where you don't need to expose the government. The question is not that the government should go or the state should disappear. That is there. That's already given. The question is how or what replaces it. In that scenario, assuming that dropping or toppling the Islamic Republic is that of the hands of the CIA, is frankly, anybody who suggested it, Roger, I think you can tell them that they're absolutely ridiculous. Nobody would actually buy that. It's not true. Second point is, which I think is also important, is what is the situation of the Islamic Republic at the moment? The protests which are taking place in Iran, I did call it at the start, was a renaissance against Islam. Now, this has got huge repercussions in the whole region. Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Lebanon, Tunisia, all of these rely heavily on the use of Islam as a means of suppression. The protests which are taking place in Iran, the banner for it is raised in Kabul, in Afghanistan, at the same time. If the Islamic Republic falls, the whole region would change. And I don't think any imperialist country favors that change. So therefore, the question of the protest being in the hands of the, if you like, the imperialists or CIA for that matter, it doesn't hold water. That's definitely not there. One other issue which I think is important is to recognize is this women's movement. They are carrying the same slogans as that was happening in 1979. It's the same movement for freedom, for equality, and recognition of the rights of women. And they are saying in the street that this is an international right. This is not a right of one group. What the right wing is trying to do is trying to show all people are the same. It doesn't matter whether you are from the very rich, whether you are from the very poor, all of the people are people of Iran. The unity is among people from that point of view. Whereas the existence of classes, the progression of the protests in Iran has actually gone hugely strides against that notion. And therefore what we see is something very, very different to what was before. A major change, and I think is an advancement from that point of view, and that is progressing. There was one question which I think was mentioned in terms of the working class. During the past 3 years, the only class that has been literally taking up strike actions, and we are talking about number of days of industrial action in Iran has gone well over thousands per year. So we have had tens of industrial actions every day. What we're seeing currently in the past 3-4 weeks is that the protests that are taking place in working class areas and clashes that are there is the existence of the working. These are, majority of these are working class people, children, youth, etc. But what we're seeing is, are we seeing the working class as a class separately? Well, I think that is a little bit more complex. The strike that we see of the oil workers immediately meant a huge number of security forces flooding the whole area. It is not as easy in terms, and it has its own complexities. Taking a strike action in universities is a lot easier, and I think less complex than taking a strike action across petrochemicals with roughly up to 120,000 workers. It has its own complexities, it has its own work, and it has its own scenarios and situations. There are huge amount of protests taking place, but are they actually coming as working class, as one class at the moment? This is in progress. What is the actual issues in here? I think probably, I'm sure you all know, that when it comes to working class, the issue is that the repression that they would face is very different from the repression the students in the university may face. This is literally a scenario where there has to be a certain amount of organization in terms of being able to ensure that there is a win. Movements have taken, the strike of petrochemical workers is still continuing despite huge amounts of arrests in that area. That is still continuing. It was going into its 6th day yesterday. That is still there. As a chain, what we are looking for is connecting a lot of these strike actions. Part of the, I think, to some extent, you could say, unrelated left, or part of the work is that they are saying general strike, as if the general strike is something that the workers would just take place, or if they don't, because they don't want to. The right wing right now is trying to say that unless we see the working class as a class coming in favor of the current scenario, that is the shortcoming. And what they're doing is they actually are using that as a pressure against the working class. Now we have this fight going on. It is still, as I said, we're right in the middle of it. It's not ended. It's not a scenario which would end tomorrow or today. It is continuing. So depolarization means further struggle and further changes. There is a difference, probably what Pam mentioned, between here and Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, there was, at least if I may say, I may be wrong, but I think this is the case, that there was an illusion that the parliament would provide an answer. There is no such illusion in Iran. There is no part of the state, it doesn't matter whether the parliament or whatever else, or this or that party, that anybody in the position of the state would say that they have got any illusion from the masses from below. That is given. There is no illusion in any part of the state. The whole idea is dismantling the complete state as a whole. Let me tell you one thing that we have said at the moment, and this is the scenario. The Islamic Republic, we all say, is like a crystal glass. A normal glass, you drop it, it breaks and you can pick up the pieces. That was like Shah's regime. The Islamic Republic is like a crystal glass. If it falls on a harder space and breaks, it becomes thousands of pieces, each of them armed. So the question is, if we are going for the final thing, to what extent are we able to combat that? So we don't want another scenario like what was West creating in terms of Libya, or what they created in Syria. That is not going to happen. What is going to happen is the Islamic Republic authorities do not have anywhere to go. So they have said we're fighting to the last bullet. And the only ones who can save them from that last bullet, I think, is the socialists and the communists, who will say, we do not recognize execution and we bring you to justice through public courts. We are the only savior for them. And they are going to fight to the last minute. And this is what is the scenario at the moment. No illusion in the state. The whole idea is dismantling. Nobody who has any illusion in the state is going to stand in front of the bullets and say, okay, I'm ready to go. And this is the situation. How it would develop tomorrow, we are doing our work, and I think the right wing is doing its work, is trying to show that they are leading the work, they are leading the banners, and also we have got the left, and I think the major mass movement, the majority in Iran, who are saying we haven't come out for the freedom and equality to be going back to having a Shah above our head as well. And in fact, the stage of the progress has been such that the Shah's son, who is supposed to be the new Shah, as a figurehead on the left, he has, on the right, he has automatically said, I don't intend to become a Shah, not because he is very modest, but simply because there is no chance of that. The question of the right wing is a strategic of getting power from the top, and the left of getting the power from below. This is the major protest which is taking place, and the polarization is pulling people to one side or the other. And I think to a large extent, I am very helpful. It's a very exciting time, a very exciting time, a very challenging time. New issues have come out on the street. The youth who have come out and said, like what David mentioned, the youth have come on the street and said, look, we don't want anything which was of the past. We want to have complete freedom, complete equality, complete right to say and live a normal life. Living a normal life is their expectation. That's the minimum they are going for. And that's what the protests are taking place. And as it progresses, as I said, it's an advancement. Whether it would be the last call or the last whistle, we're yet to see. But it is definitely a major change in the whole region.
I want to just allow some time just to take some more question contributions. You'll get time to make some closing comments at the end. Is that okay? We can now return to some of the hands. We had a couple of hands up before, because obviously people are contributing things, and also people are making points in the chat as well. So maybe it's either worth them sticking their hands up, or if you could just have a quick look in the chat and see if there's anything you'd like to respond to. Ella, you had your hand up just before I brought a man back in. Do you still want to speak?
Thank you very much. I just had a small question, but maybe I'm covered already. I was
okay. Yeah.
I don't know about the parties. I was reading about the parties they are acting now, this period in Iran. That the two major parties, of course, is the Islamic Democracy Party and the Reformers. And that in the Kurdish area, up the north, if I can say, near Turkey and so on, is I was reading about the military side of the Communist Party. Is that true?
I'm not sure what you mean by Communist Party.
There was a Communist Party was created 1983. And it has a military wing, and this wing is still active up in the Kurdish area.
Whenever you want me to answer, I'll answer, but I don't.
Yeah, I'll take some more contributions. Sorry, man, I'm talking over. Just trying to see if there's any more contributions for us. We're 5:25 now, so we're starting to get towards the end of the meeting. So, John or Dominic, you had your hand up before. No, you don't want to say it now. Anybody else? Run out of hands now, I've stopped you. Anybody that's put anything in the chat want to actually say what they want to say to the meeting? Quite a few things in. Right, okay, David Hemson.
Comrades, I just want to expand a little on the points which Roger has made, Aman has responded to, and to relate to our understanding of the permanent revolution. Because imperialism does not support democracy in anywhere in the world, really. It aims to support different sections of different ruling classes in different countries, but it will definitely not support revolution, particularly during a time of international crisis, as we see, right now. In South Africa, imperialism never supported democratic struggles. In Iran, it never supported democratic struggles. In Egypt, it's never supported democratic struggles. It will say it's supporting democratic struggles. It will put out postures and propaganda to say, yes, we're with you all the time. Even Steve Biko in South Africa had illusions, and I debated that with him, in the United States suddenly doing some miracle in South Africa and overturning apartheid or just withdrawing support. It never happened. So even revolutionaries can get illusions that there is support from the West for democracy. There is no support. The point I'm making in that chat line was that when the Arab Spring took place, America and the West generally said, well, it's a good thing in general, right? But when it came to specific struggles such as that in Egypt, Clinton in her book, wrote that initially she thought this was a good idea, but as soon the reality came on her that actually they could lose some bastion of the West in Egypt, which is supporting reaction throughout the whole Arab world. So the last thing they wanted to do was to pull the plug on that bastion and allow a democratic revolution in Egypt. Instead, we have Egypt now, I think, with something like 100,000 political prisoners. Many, we just don't understand the extent to which the West is actually supporting repression in these countries. And even fairly, very moderate, even pro-capitalist Democrats in Egypt are put in prison, and the West will make not a peep about it. So he has no illusions whatsoever, and I think that's the idea that America is supporting. It's just that people do not understand the language of Western bourgeois politicians. They say one thing and they do exactly the opposite. Now, when do we learn? Are we not sophisticated enough to know that? We know that there will posture in one way, and they'll do something exactly the opposite. And unfortunately, many good comrades have lost their lives with such illusions, and we mustn't allow it from that side. And to the Stalinists, we say, we support democracy, and what you are arguing is capitalism supporting democracy. It's not such thing, and we must explain the permanent revolution to them. Just one last point, if I could, just to return to the education. We've got a whole generation moving into struggle and into revolution. We've got to stretch every sinew that we have to be able to provide the ideas in quite the way in which they can understand them, absorb them, and develop them, because we've got, what can I say, almost limitless number of cadres coming in, women cadres coming into the struggle in the Middle East. It's astonishing gift, you know, which has been given to Marxism, to be able to work with this generation and to convince them that Marxism is the way forward, that they can work together with the working class and its heavy battalions and the rest, and actually serve in leading and supporting and then leading that struggle. That young generation could be the future revolution, the future revolution, the rulers of a democratic and socialist Iran, and I salute them.
Thank you, David. Ian, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of things that I put. Oh, it's gone a bit dark. Maybe I'll just put the video off. But yeah, just a couple of things I put in the chat. Firstly, and most importantly, the thing about just an expression from a man that I heard, a renaissance against Islam. Now, I'd certainly support a renaissance against reactionary political Islamism. I think your analysis of how it's been a useful enemy for the left, and they used to say about Margaret Thatcher, for the West, sorry, they used to say about Margaret Thatcher in this country, she was lucky in her enemies with Gualtieri and some of the uselessness of the trade unions that didn't combine against her. So to have such a sectional opponent that can't reach out to the rest of the world in the same way, that's facing the same kind of problems of imperialism and poverty, has been, with a universalist message, has been very useful to the West. And a more universal, more worker-based development in the region would put them on notice. But at the same time, there has been the impression created, especially in the war on terror, that the West, the imperialists, are involved in some kind of a crusade against the religion of Islam itself. And to say, I might have misheard you, but to say against Islam as opposed to against Islamism would almost make be a weapon in the hands of the Islamists to say, look, the left are the same as the West. Maybe that's why I made that Freudian slip there at the start myself, because that's the worry. And I just said at the end of that comment, presumably there are plenty of practicing Muslims on the demos themselves. That there'll be a lot of people in Iran who believe in God but don't believe in the regime, and will be part of the overturn if it happens, and certainly this protest movement. And I suppose the other thing, maybe less important, more historical now, but yeah, I can see why the West would have liked to have Khomeini come in and smash the left wing of the movement after the Shah fell, but they did fall out not long after with the embassy siege and the West setting Saddam Hussein on Iran, and so on, Iran's realignment in the region, even with Lebanon and stuff like that. So I wonder what your thoughts are on how all that fits in. As I said in my comment, even that was done pretty stupidly and self-defeatingly, because they had a vendetta against Jimmy Carter. They helped to bring Ronald Reagan to power. And then there was the whole Iran-Contra scandal not long after that. But yeah, so those two kind of questions, especially this thing about Islam, there'll be, I'd imagine, at least a lot of people who are Islamic but anti-Islamist in the movement.
Okay, thanks, Ian. We've still got time for a couple of more contributions or questions before I ask Eman to sum up. One thing I'm interested in, you've mentioned the oil workers, and of course the oil industry is absolutely key to the Iranian economy. And I know there have been groups of lawyers out on the streets. I just wondered if you could just outline which other groups of workers are involved in it, because you did talk about a lot of strike days, if you answer that question. If there's nobody else. No? Okay, back to Eman then.
Sorry. Okay, I'll try to be very brief, I think, this time.
You can sum up now, really, because nobody else has got the hand up. So we've got 25 minutes to fill yet. So
okay. Several points were mentioned. Let me try and see if I have forgotten any of one of them. Please do remind me. But I think I'll probably try to answer them all. There is one thing which I think is important, and that is in terms of what is happening on the ground in terms of the workers and their struggles. What we have is a widespread protest, but this protest is facing its own battles in different distances. The Islamic Republic has tried to make divisions. Even within the oil industry, we have huge number of workers who are contract workers. And some of these contract workers, in petrochemical especially, they come under smaller contract workers again, and then again, smaller contract workers. So we have got large of these different agreements or contracts that are made. Some of them are what we call blank, like a 0 hour, but these are called blank contracts, which is literally the worker just goes in and signs their name, and the boss signs their name, and they write the terms afterwards. So we have huge number of different types of divisions that has been made over the years. That's one thing. The extent of them protesting, the overall idea suffers from other issues as well. What the Islamic Republic has also tried to do is to make people actually based on their nationality and position. So, for example, this is happening also in the armies as well, in the security forces. In a city, for example, in Kurdistan, the security forces are not brought in from that city. They take these security forces to somewhere else and they bring some other group there. Not because they're just thinking that, oh, they are sort of nationalists, not because of that, but because those security forces have to live in the area. And it's not easy to live in an area where you've been shooting at other people. So it is something that they logistically have been doing non-stop. That's happening as well. They have done it in terms of the parts of the areas in the south as well, that some of the people who are actually the contractors, they bring them from somewhere else. So therefore they distance their groups. So huge amount of divisions. And in some areas, for example, if you imagine, just to give you as an analogy, if you imagine that part of the bosses in Wales or in Scotland are English and vice versa. So the whole idea is they're trying to play on the nationalistic rules as well. Any form of division they can do, they provide. In some places, what they have done, they haven't employed local people. So when they employ and bring workers, they bring workers from another area. So a variety of ways of division to avoid any form of unity. I always remember what happens in the first page of the manifesto, Communist Manifesto, where it's written that capitalists came to power, but the question is how they stay in power. And the reason why they stay in power is because of divisions that they've created. So they have been doing this consistently, and this is not 1 year, 1 month, or 2 months. This has happened across 4 decades, in addition to what Shah had done. So for workers in one area to say, we are standing united, and they have come out on a strike, that means they've overcome all of those divisions one by one. So that's why I said it's complexities upon complexities. It's not just as easy as in a university where everybody goes into a classroom. So they overcome all of these divisions in order to make sure that they are able to actually come out in a protest. That's one thing. The petrochemicals have got effectively related industries. The actual number of people who are officially by the state employed in the oil industry are not huge in number. in comparison. There are a few thousand compared to over 150,000. So this group is the only group that has got government as their employer. The rest of them are spread across a variety of companies. So when, for example, we say in one area in As Alawiya, which is one of the major oil fields, when they come on strike, that means not only they brought people from all of the different contractual parts, but they've actually come together as one unit, and they have said, we want better life, better conditions, better situations, irrespective of who's the contractor. And that is the scenario. So when they came out, for example, 6 days ago in the two cities, Abadan and As Alawiya, what they said was, we have not been able to get the rights that we demanded and the strike that we had recently. We want to come on a strike in support and alongside the major protests that are taking place across Iran. So they are actually showing solidarity with the rest of the protests as a class. This is the bit which is, as I said, has its own complexities. It is not as easy, but it is actually progressing and it is developing more and more. We know Haftar had called for groups and demonstrations in their city, which is the major bulwark of, if you like, the working class in terms of Haftar workers of the sugar industries. So they have actually called for this as well. So there are variety issues, but the suppression that they face is very different to what we see in the street. It is immediate and it is very harsh. So they have to overcome that as well and have to ensure that they can go back and have some money, or if you like, work tomorrow. So it is something which needs more work on, and it is progressing. And I'm sure you appreciate it is not something which gives an answer immediately. If it does, then automatically the regime would fall immediately. Just to give you another example, in 1979, oil workers came on a strike. But in the city near Tehran, where they came out, part of the workers who came on the solidarity with the mass movement that was taking place across the society at the time against the Shah, they came out and they said, we want an end to the complete SAVAK. SAVAK is the secret police. We want abolishment of the secret police. That was their slogan. We still got work to get to that stage. If the society feels this is the last battle, and in order for it to be the last battle, they need to be prepared and they need to make sure that they can win. Because it's many other parties, many other groups of society, if they are failed in any protest movement, they go back and tomorrow they come back again. But when it comes to the socialists, when it comes to leaders within the working class, if they actually fail, they would be pushed down for 40 years, 10 years. It's not that easy. It's a different position. So therefore, ensuring our winning, and I always say, one of the things that every striking worker, any striking leader in any workplace always needs to be sure is, will I be safe? When the workers can safeguard their leaders and ensure that they can safeguard them, that's the time. Until that time, they have to prepare. And this is bring its own situation in Iran. And I'm sure like working class everywhere else has got the same scenario. There is one thing which was mentioned about the protest in terms of the Renaissance that I mentioned. There is a difference. We have brought leaflets, we have campaigned for it, especially in Sweden and in Germany. The Democratic Party in Sweden came out in the protest of the people who were supporting the protests in Iran. The fascists have come out and their slogan is simply because they're actually trying to ride the bandwagon, and they are saying using the Iranian politicians, and they have used them to come up and they're trying to gather force for themselves, and they are talking about anti-Muslim. Now, there is a huge difference between anti-Muslim and the Renaissance that I'm talking about. That's a major issue. I think it is against Islam, and Islam as a rule. And I think the Renaissance itself was against rule, Christianity and church as clarity of its establishment. It's similar in that respect. It is actually saying that forceful enforcement of hijab on women, the actual subjugation of people, separation and segregation is Islamic. What is actually ruling in Afghanistan today is Islam. What is ruling in Iran is Islam. What ISIS was is Islam. Beheading, stoning is Islam. So it's not a case of saying, oh, we are talking about people's beliefs. Obviously, we have the recognition of the right of everyone to their own opinion, whether they are of religion, without religion, or anything else. The whole idea of freedom literally means that, freedom of expression of anything. But there is a difference between when we're talking about religion in government, religion in rule. Religion in rule in Iran, they bring Sharia law. We had to fight in UK against the Sharia law until we managed to force it to actually go back through the courts, etc., etc. We had to fight in that foreground as well. And unfortunately, the left in UK was nowhere near that. The Sharia law was accepted in UK and it was ruling until we actually created a big campaign against it. And I think we were, in other words, opportunity enough for the left to come in and say, yeah, we recognize this. Because there was always a notion that if we say anything about the Islam, it would mean we are racist, which is not true. We have fought against the rule of religion, and I think it is after 40 years, it is right to say this has finished. The rule of Islam is not possible. All of the laws in Iran are Islamic. And because they are Islamic, and because of this, they are actually a tool of capitalists. Bourgeoisie and capitalism uses religion. It's a different time to when religion was first started. Once the capitalism comes to power, then in that case, religion is another tool in the hands of capitalists. It is a hands of the capitalists, and that's what they have used. So the actual protest in Iran, to a large extent, is calling for an end to the Islamic Republic. And anybody who says this is not Islam, at least so far as society is concerned, across the Middle East, they all see it as Islam. It is Islam. They have different shades, ISIS to Islamic Republic, to Taliban. But in the essence, they all are enforcing the rule of Islam. And what they're saying, none of that is non-Islamic. So what we're calling is, there's a difference between Islam and Muslim. And I think this is the same thing for across all of the world. There is one last question that was asked, and that was about the CP. I know CP in general, in most Europe and across the world, to a large extent, CPs are known as pro-Moscow or pro-Russian at the time. Well, the CP in Iran didn't have the name CP. The CP in Iran had the name of People's Party, Tudeh Party, Masses Party. That's what it was called. That was a pro-Russian party. The actual Communist Party, which was formed back in early 1980s, was from the extreme left. And the Communist Party there was really calling for socialism and socialist revolution. Then there was certain splits. Part of it then moved, the people who actually created that initial party, then they moved on and they created the Workers' Communist Party, which had further splits after almost 8 years afterwards down the line. That's the way it has gone. Now, I think there are two things. First of all, when the Islamic Republic came into power, soon after, they drew an army against Kurdistan, and it was a war. In Kurdistan, the people actually stood up against the Islamic Republic and they picked up arms. And they stood up against the Islamic Republic and they had areas where it was called free areas. Later on, the Islamic Republic gathered forces and pushed them back, and those areas were disappeared. Some of them took their camps inside Iraq. Now, this is one issue with regard to the issue of, if you like, they call them the people who actually have picked up arms. Those were the people. And it has got a major position in terms of the history of that region. The nationalists now have got the name of the Communist Party in Kurdistan. So it's different to what we see. Personally, there are several things which I think are important to mention. Number one, I think it would be at least foolhardy to imagine in a country like Iran, the communists, the socialists, the actual people who want socialist revolution think that their party should not be armed. I don't think that any party would survive. That's number one. When would that happen? How would that happen? Obviously, it changes from society to society, and in Iran is also a different story. The situation in Kurdistan in terms of arms is very different from the rest of the country. It is not lack of arms in Kurdistan. There is enough arms in that place. The question is, right now, the nationalists want to make the protests that are taking place into an armed confrontation. That is one thing which would benefit the bourgeoisie. If that happens, if they try to make it very quickly an armed confrontation, then the situation of Libya would happen in Iran. It is too early to become an armed confrontation at the moment. That's too early. The workers, the people need to have their organizations. They can't go like the, I know the sound politically, it may be incorrect, but I think it would give us an expression. We can't go like the Native Americans fighting against the American army. We would lose. They would crush us like anything. We would need to be organized. We need to have enough numbers. We need to have sufficient organization, mass organizations to be able to stand up in front of the army. That would take the time. And I think no revolution would take place without an armed confrontation. Bourgeoisie would not let go of the power. That would happen at its own time. Right now, it's too early. Now we're calling for our right to defend ourselves. That is our right, to defend ourselves. Should we make it an armed confrontation? I think those who are trying to make this an armed confrontation too early will play in the hands of the Islamic Republic and the capitalists. It's too early, and we have seen the experience in Libya. That is too early, and that should not happen. And honestly, across the board, people have had up to here. So therefore, there is a lot of intention, even good intention. It sounds radical, it sounds militant, but it is not the time yet. And we had to sort of say, hold on, anybody who wants to do this is adventurous, and they don't recognize that the society, working class, and people need to have their own organizations sufficiently to be able to confront the state completely. And that time hasn't come in. Whether that would happen or not, nobody knows. In 1979, it happened. It wasn't the case that people had arms. They actually raided one area, they took up the arms, and they fought against the army. And revolution occurred, uprising occurred. There's a difference between revolution and uprising. The moment of uprising is different. That we cannot predict. Anything could happen. But at the moment, the whole idea is build, unite, and move, and advance what we have got, establish whatever we have gained. This is the position we have. We have to establish every single gain. If we manage to make an area where it is impossible for them to enforce the Islamic rules, we establish it, so therefore that becomes. And we always use this very similarly. If you go to an area where there are a lot of Islamic fanatics, every woman at night would have to think what they wear when they go out. We want it to be reversed. So any area which is established and is free is freedom of expression, is freedom to dress, is freedom to organize, is freedom to strike. We need to establish this at every stage that we go in, and without having our bulwarks established, our progress could be taken back. So the whole idea is every battle we need to win, but the war is still going on. And as part of that, we need to make sure that this protest is not just continuing, but is establishing its gains. And right wing wants to just take these people as their background army that could be slaughtered so that they would have enough to deal from the top. This is one possibility in Iran. The other possibility, which I think is the mass movement, is another. This is the polarization which is taking place in the country. This is the polarization which we are in the middle of. Nothing has been determined yet. See what happens. We all got to do it. What is expected internationally? Well, CGT, CFD, and 5 other syndicates in France put a same declaration in support of the people in Iran. And in there, they said that people in Iran want freedom, they want equality, and they don't want any oppressor, whether it is Shah or a mullah. And we had another one from the international trade unions who actually said People in Iran want democracy. People in Iran want to have the freedom of choice. And that was all they wanted. So we have got this issue as well. And I think working class across the world, internationally, and we all know it, how the bureaucrats work. We all know there are politics in all of this as well. But what do we call for? We call for immense solidarity with a revolutionary movement that is going to change a huge amount of situation. And I don't think it would be just the Middle East once it changes. And I think the spread is much wider. Recognizing a revolution, which is a women's revolution, equality for women and men, is going to gather momentum everywhere. Right now, we have Roger Waters coming up in singing for it, right to the extreme dance groups who have come in and have talked about it. And across different parts, there are a huge amount of artists across the Arab states have actually declared support for the right of women, and with the slogan of women, life, freedom. And in itself, that is one thing which I think is very international. From that point of view, it's international in its nature. From that point of view, it's left-wing, it's working class, it's socialist. And from that point of view, it would not accept any capitalist alternative, right-wing, or any other type who would actually not recognize that right. It's impossible to push these people back now. It needs huge amount of crushing force. And even if they do it, it would rise again much more, and I think hugely more vastly next time. Just as the capitalist crisis gets deeper and deeper each time, I think we are seeing across the years, the protest movement are getting much more organized, much more advanced, and much more conscious as we're going forward. And our job is to make sure that this reaches a successful end of the socialist revolution. I hope I've answered your questions.
That's absolutely brilliant, Aman. Thanks very much as you're talking. Obviously, the light's going where you are because you disappear into the background. Another 5 minutes, we won't be able to see it. So a massive thanks to Aman for that absolutely wonderful introduction, and thanks for everybody for your contributions. I can see it in the chat that another discussion is starting, but obviously we can't have that now. So again, thanks very much, and I'm sure we'll express our solidarity with particularly the women, but with the people of Iran in their quest to a decent life, really. Right. Okay, we'll go back over to Roger now because he probably has something to say about next week's meeting. He usually does.
Well, first of all, what a brilliant discussion today. Thank you, Aman, and to all the comrades who participated. Next week, we're focusing on another country in crisis, another regime that is in dire crisis, and that's in Britain. And we're going to have a number of comrades who are going to open up the discussion, including, I believe, the Byrne brothers, Peter Sinclair, and other comrades too. And it'll be, we would like all the comrades to participate and to contribute their ideas. See you next week. By the way, I was very pleased to see we have comrades here today from 12 countries. A real international discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Okay, with that, I hope to see you next week, and I declare the meeting closed. Good afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Bye.